All right, Adam. So the Nuggets are 7-3 right now in the season after a slow start. And what's always amazed me about Nikola Jokic is how he becomes what the team needs from him. He was once a liability on defense, so he gets in shape. There was a time earlier in his career where he'd have games where he'd take 4 or 5 shots because in his eyes, I think he thought, well, I'm selfless. I want to pass the ball and make my teammates better. But then he realized, oh, wait, to be selfless, it means to score more. That's what I need to do to help my team actually win games. And since then, he's won 3 MVPs, 1 Finals MVP, 1 championship. And here we are with it happening all over again. The Nuggets lose key guys. They're younger. They're a little bit weaker on offense, especially to start the season. And here he is, 29.7 points per game, a career high. Lack of shooting on the team, shooting 56% from 3, a career high. Number 4 in the league in scoring, number 1 in assists, number 1 in rebounds. 7-3 Nuggets. They've won 5 in a row. Jokic is posting stat lines that nobody has ever done in the history of basketball. Adam, is this the best version of Jokic that we have ever seen?
There's no question it is. I mean, because he hasn't lost anything. I mean, it's not like he's not doing anything he was doing before. He's not doing any of those things at a lesser degree or lower level than he was ever doing them before. But to your point, what he has increased has been his three-point shooting, which, by the way, I don't think he's going to shoot 56% all the time. But you mentioned something interesting about him being a reluctant scorer and having to learn. I think that was the toughest lesson he had to learn over the course of his ascension to MVP status, was exactly how you framed it. Sometimes the selfish play is actually passing, put pressure on the defense. That was a tough hump, I think, for him to overcome. Jamal Murray's injury a couple of years back, I think, pushed him to become more aggressive as a scorer, and he got comfortable doing that. But I always think that he's been a 33% career three-point shooter, and he's been a 40% career shooter in the playoffs. And I always think it has to do with, when he gets to the playoffs, his mind frame is, I have to shoot. Teams are going to pack the paint. They're going to make adjustments. I have to come ready to shoot. This year, and I think it was game number 1 against the Thunder, he kind of looked around at the scenario and said, I'm going to have to shoot this year. And mentally, he's been in a zone where he's anticipating shooting. He's prepared for it, and he has a quicker trigger on it. So I'm not surprised that he's shooting well. I'm surprised he's shooting 56%, but I'm not surprised he's having a career year, because I just think that he kind of internalizes what's needed, puts his mind towards it, and is just more focused on whatever that target is.
Is that something Michael Malone or members of the front office in the past have steered him towards doing? Like, was he pushed to score more this season? Was he asked, like, hey, you're going to have to shoot more, you're going to have to score more? Or does he kind of assess the situation himself and he realizes, okay, this is what I need to do?
I don't think he's had to be pushed at all, to be honest. Michael Malone, early on, more say in 2018-19, he would often say an aggressive Nikola is the best Nikola. We want him to be aggressive. So there would be like public comments, but I don't think the team ever questioned. Michael Malone would always say, Jokic feels the game better than anyone else. I don't need to tell him. He sees it. And, sometimes we'll talk about different things, but he sees what's going on. And I just think it's his own feel for the game and understanding. And by the way, the European style of game doesn't usually have scorers at volume. It's just more of a team game. The defensive rules allow for it a little bit more. So I think it's even, in some somewhat cultural or experiential, where most of his life scoring was a bad thing. And the guys that were too aggressive, that was a negative thing. The NBA is not that way. I think he had to learn that lesson over the first 5 years or so of his career, but we're well past it. And now he would love to pass every time down court. That's his nature, but he understands the situation and he's more aggressive than ever. He plays like Shaq. When he gets a guy who can't guard him, he forces the double every possession because he is going right into the chest of him. So I think he's just over that hump. And that was a battle he fought years ago, and he's on the other side of it now.
You mentioned he played like Shaq. If he wanted to, he could score 40. He just overpowers every single team. And that Dallas has a lot of size. Like, obviously, Lively's out, but you still have Gafford. Luka is big and strong, but Jokic is just too strong, too big, too wide, and too skilled on top of all that for anybody. It doesn't matter what you do against him. And with Jokic adding the three-point shot or improving the three-point shot, at least, through 10 games so far this season, as you said, doubt he's going to shoot over 50% for the season. It's just unreasonable to anticipate that. But you brought up something interesting, though, how he shoots better from 3 in the postseason, because he has the mind frame of, well, I have to shoot now. It's an interesting thought there with somebody like Jokic, that it's the approach going into games, thinking about what he's going to have to do, and then he does it. That's always been the way he is with everything he does. It makes me think about when I interviewed him in 2016 or 2017. It's like one of the few interviews he's done in his career, like one-on-ones. I don't even know how many he's done since then. But I remember I asked him, I was like, in regards to his passing, I was like, have you always been able to just put the ball like where you want to put it? Like, have you ever practiced passing? And he's like, no, anytime I want to pass the ball, I look in the direction and it goes where I want it to go. And it's kind of like that when it comes to his overall game. If he wants to do something, it feels like it just happens. It just manifests into reality for him.
I had no idea. So that quote is something over at DNVR we've talked about a lot. The ball goes where I want it to go. I had no idea that was a Kevin O'Connor quote. That's incredible, man. We always reference that one because it is true, man. Like it's his floater. It's everything. The ball just goes where he's like, oh, I want to shoot it. There, it went in. I want to pass it. That went right to the spot. Like, it's just something innate about him. And it's the same with his touchdown passes. He threads the weirdest needles on these like 60-foot passes. And you think, how did he do it? Well, because the ball goes where he wants it to go. And he just has this magic touch that is always on the money. It's special about him. And his brain is incredible. His touch is incredible. And you combine those two things together, and literally every basketball skill is some combination of touch and seeing the floor, court mapping. And he just has both in spades.
Well, this season, he's averaging 115.8 touches per game. That's a career high for him. He never logged over 102 before. That doesn't mean he's dominating the ball. He still has a low average dribbles per touch, average seconds per touch. He still gets rid of the ball quick. That's all the same. It's just 13 more or so touches per game. One of the things that's been interesting with Denver this season, in part due to Jokic, he's shooting over 50% from three. Denver is second in the NBA in three-point percentage, but last in three-point attempts per game. Now, with Jokic, his presence and obviously his majestic passing ability, that creates open shots for guys. But with the touches he's getting, the Nuggets cut a lot around him. They're number one in the NBA in cuts per game on synergy, averaging 12.5. That's first ahead of the Warriors, who are routinely first in that number. How does cutting shape Denver's offensive spacing, Adam?
Incredibly. I mean, and they are a phenomenal cutting team. I think this is by far the best cutting team that Denver's had. And it's two things. One of it is proper spacing. So when people talk Denver has a lack of shooting, they don't necessarily have a lack of spacing. They have guys that can occupy different spots and do different things, put the ball on the floor, or what have you. You mentioned the touches. One of the reasons he's getting more touches and one of the reasons it's effective is he's surrounded by guys that don't know what to do other than cut off of him. It's almost like the limitation creates the strength. So Julian Strawther catches a swing pass, but he's not open enough for a shot. Maybe he has a lane to attack a closeout. Maybe he has something else. But most of the time, if nothing's wide open, it's, all right, get the ball back to Jokic. Like, keep it going. So Jokic will touch the ball, get it out of his hands. Nothing's open, gets back to it, touches it, something else. And the more times you do that in the half court, something's going to open up. You almost never go 24 seconds, 3 or 4 touches to Jokic and nothing came of it. Something will come of it, but nobody is breaking the chain. You're constantly, even if you get a defensive rotation and stop, you're going to have to make another one and then another one and another one, and eventually you break down. And what makes good cutters on this team? Russell Westbrook, first of all, has been a phenomenal cutter. His speed has been something Jokic hasn't really had before, a player that can hit the gap as quickly as he can. Christian Brown has great size. He's like a tight end, like charging down the lane. So if he is open and he gets the ball, you have to not just meet him with height, but you have to meet him with strength because he's going so hard at the rim. And then Peyton Watson has that long wingspan. He's long, he's athletic. These guys are all, if you think about it like a quarterback, he's got different types of receivers he can throw to at all times. And they're so good at spacing, but then cutting on time. Because again, they can't do anything else at this moment. So if all you can score off of is cuts, you're going to really focus on how to cut. And that's what the Nuggets are doing right now.
And you mentioned Russ, like sometimes he can be the quarterback for Jokic too. And like Jokic is the receiver on those cuts a lot of the time. I'm thinking about, there's this play, I forget who it was against last week, but Peyton Watson had 2 guys around him and Jokic was in the restricted area clapping his hands. He's like, throw me the ball. He wanted probably a wraparound pass from Watson, but Watson didn't see it. He decided to be safe. He kicked it out to Russ. And then Russ immediately hot potato the ball to Jokic, who was still open and got a layup out of it. But Russ, we talk all the time about, the things he doesn't do. I say we as in I do it all the time. He's still not scoring well, but there's no use on focusing on that, the scoring efficiency, when he's had over 20 points 3 times. He has a positive assist to turnover ratio. He's got great chemistry with Jokic. And as you said, he's bringing speed and energy and the cutting and the passing and the playmaking. But the speed is the big thing that Jokic hasn't had before. And it does, I admit, I'm not fully convinced it's going to work in the postseason, but Adam, you and I texted about this before the season. The speed is something that Jokic desired and that he's going to bring to this team, and it looks great. He motors the ball up the floor, getting Jokic easy baskets and those quick decisions as well, like that pass after Watson kicked it out to him. I think those are all signs that this is something building in a positive manner between Jokic and Westbrook, and so far it's working very well.
You think about it, Russ gives them another hub. You have Jokic as your main hub. You have Jamal Murray as one of your main hubs, and now you have Russell Westbrook as your main hub. That's the end of the list. Everybody else is a cutter and a spacer, but it's nice to have multiple guys, 2 on the court at all times that can make that connecting pass. So when Peyton Watson doesn't see it or isn't confident enough to risk the pass, you make the one pass and there's Russ who can make that connection. His passing, it's funny because he averaged triple-double several years. He's always been a high assist guy, but I'm still shocked by his passing. He's a phenomenal entry passer. He makes really good interior passes, and you talked about, Denver not taking a lot of threes. They're really good traditionally because Jokic is so good, but they're really good at interior passing. So even when the defense is kind of shrinking in, they're really good at making the little drop off to Aaron Gordon or the little pocket pass to Jamal or whatever it is in short spaces. And Russ fits into that. He's just another guy that works with that. So the passing has been a revelation. And you mentioned the speed has been a revelation. The cuts, the defense, if you think about defense on Jokic, you're almost always putting 2 on ball when he's in the post or at the elbow because you can't afford to give single coverage to Jokic. So you're always going to be having 2 on him and 3 to guard 4. Well, what Russ does is he's such a speedy cutter that 3 on the weak side, they have to react quickly to him. He's either open right away, but even if they react, he's cutting with such speed that they're reacting so hard. They're dragging themselves even more out of rotation. So when Jokic, the best in the game at making those skip passes, a 4-on-3 now all of a sudden becomes a 3-on-2, which is even more of an advantage. And the cutting is what's opening that up. He's a huge part of that.
You mentioned the young guys, Adam. Christian Brown averaging 16 points in 35 minutes this season, 50% from 3, 5 boards, positive assist to turnover ratio, really good on defense still. Meanwhile, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope left Jokic and he looks washed up in Orlando. Peyton Watson, Aaron Gordon's out. Peyton Watson, bigger role. Peyton Watson, long-armed, excellent defender, shooting 39% from 3. Julian Strawther, making only 36% of his threes, but really solid in an increasing role. I think Calvin Booth deserves some credit here for some of these young draft picks that are ascending with opportunities that they're finally getting. Do you agree with me there, that Booth deserves some credit?
I think it's early. We're 10 games in. It's easy to.
It's very early. Very early.
It's easy to take a victory lap.
Promising, right?
If you look at what Cal believed in, and he's been very open, even with you, about what it is the vision is for, hey, why did he pick Peyton Watson? Why did he take Julian Strawther? Why did he take Christian Brown? It's not just that they're having success through 10 games. It's that it looks like what he projected. They have athletes all over the court. Those guys are very athletic. They cover an enormous amount of ground. They do different things.
All of them.
All cutters. And again, they're not guys that need fed, at least at the moment, as they don't need anything. Christian Brown isn't asking for plays. He's not asking for anything. He's fitting off of what's happening and very comfortable setting screens and cutting through just to drag a defender or whatever it is. And another thing that's interesting, you mentioned KCP. 2 thoughts on him. One, I know that there were some internal metrics that showed how hard are guys working in an average game. How much ground are they covering? How often do they go into the paint? How often are they muscling with other players? And I know KCP came up very low on that. As good as he is as a player, he's not a guy that lives inside the 3-point line on offense. And defensively, he does a lot of work, but it's not physical work. You look at the scoring this year, Christian Brown's averaging 8 points per game in the paint. KCP averaged 2. So what you're losing with KCP on 3-point shooting and spacing, you're gaining with this rhinoceros that is, you saw the dunk on Rudy Gobert. Christian Brown's capable of those types of plays because he's strong and athletic and he goes to the rim hard. So you're gaining this paint pressure off ball that is exactly what the picture Cal painted was. These guys are going to be so hard to guard up weak side, crashing and smashing through the rim. And he took a lot of heat for it. At media day, he all but came out and said shooting's overrated. In the one era where everyone's taking 53s, and he's like, why would we try to do that? We're going to have our own way. 10 games in, there's big questions ahead, but so far that's been the case. Denver's offense is not struggling at all, especially when Jokic's on the court.
Definitely trending up. Jokic far and away the number one spot for the MVP right now, winning his fourth. And I mean, we'll see. It's only 10 games in, but number one on my MVP power rankings so far.
There you go.
Jamal Murray looking better in his 2 games since he got back. Michael Porter Jr. looking better. Things are looking very good for Denver. On the other side of that game over the weekend is Dallas. They're 5-5 now. And the thing that's disappointed me most so far this season is I don't feel like Luka has taken the leap that you'd hope for after a heartbreaking loss in the postseason, losing in the finals to Boston. He doesn't look like he's in amazing shape. He's not scoring efficiently, only 33% from 3, still taking a ton of tough shots. Still a lot of your turn, my turn with Kyrie Irving, who obviously was brilliant in that game against Denver. Not taking anything away from him, but I don't love what I've seen from Luka. I don't love the supporting cast with Dallas. I was skeptical about them before the season. Clay's been okay, shooting only 35% from 3, but the team overall, 15th three-point attempts, 20th in three-point percentage. I don't believe that they've solved the three-point issue with Dinwiddie, with Marshall, with Grimes, and with Clay. 22% for PJ Washington, 29% for Dinwiddie, 29% for Hardy, 20% for Marshall, 33% for Grimes. That was their biggest issue, Adam, and I'm not seeing the massive progress there with their offseason changes.
Well, they have had some injuries, some guys in and out of the lineup. So I'll just caveat with that. When you're in 10 games, you miss a couple key starters for a handful of games. It becomes a large percentage of your overall, what you're drawing from. But you mentioned to me what is the biggest question mark around the Mavericks, which is Luka Doncic. He was on fire from 3 last year for the entire season, especially on his step back. You wondered if that was sustainable. So far this season, it has not been. But if we contrast what we just said with Nikola Jokic, with what we have with Luka Doncic, and I think we're going to talk about Embiid later, and there's a reason I have skepticism. Both of them have the same issue. Luka loves the parts of the game he is absolutely dominant at. And your team almost becomes then, if you only go to that, the question with your team is, well, can we make shots off of him? He's going to be dominant. He's going to do his thing. And we just need to knock down shots around him. And he has to make the tough shots that he's capable of making. Well, he's not making those right now. And the guys around him aren't making the shots around him. So what do you go to? Is Luka a guy that's setting up Kyrie Irving, not with a pass, not with a drive, breakdown, and swing it over? Jokic sets screens for guys. Jokic boxes out for guys and clears out and gets to the corner. Jokic will do every part of basketball, whether it's sexy or unsexy. He'll do it. And Luka, to me, is a guy that totally, last night, Kyrie has it going. Give him the ball. He did it a decent amount, got it to him, and you're just getting out of the way. But it's almost like he's uncomfortable there. So it's like, hey, now let me get one in. Just because I haven't had one for a while, takes a logo 3 in an absolutely crucial point of the game. To me, the question with Luka is not, is he great enough to dominate the style of basketball that he loves? Ball in his hand, pick and roll, attacking. We know he's dominant at that, but are you developing a second punch? Another thing you can do if a team overloads on that, and watching them early on in the season, it kind of looks like they just want to repeat the script. They had a little bit of success, but they didn't really get that close, right? They weren't that close to Boston. And I think that might be a tough lesson that they're going to have to learn of, hey, you have to add layers to what you are. You can't just keep doing the same thing.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you. Look, okay, I don't want to go back to when Luka was a teenager and talk about what he did with Real Madrid, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Okay.
He was more of a cutter when he played for Real Madrid as a teenager. We know he can do it. We know he does it for the national team a little bit more often, even though he's more ball dominant with the national team. He's a high IQ cerebral basketball player. He has it in him to be more of a mover without the basketball. He's huge. He's 6'9". He's got a wide body. Why is he not utilized even far more often as a screener, off ball, on ball? Where are these layers to his game that he is fully capable of doing? And we know, because when he played youth basketball, he was asked to do these things. Clearly, he doesn't want to do it. As you said, he wants to be the ball dominant scorer. And to his credit, he's amazing. He's incredible. He's going to be a Hall of Famer. Maybe someday he'll win an MVP. But I'm not so sure about that. Well, we're talking about Jokic possibly winning his 4th, and you got other guys that could potentially do it as well in the years to come. Victor Wembanyama is ascending. Maybe SGA eventually wins one. There's a lot of competition at the top of the league. But for Luka, to me, that's the area that he needs to improve on the most. We know what he can do on ball. We know he's going to have great scoring nights. The 3-point percentage will improve, yada, yada, yada. It's all going to get better. But where are the other layers to the game? And that's what's disappointing me with him, especially because we know he can do it from many, many years ago. Many years ago, maybe it's gone forever, but it was there.
There's no way it's come back. Yeah. There's no way it's gone. And the ultimate example of this to me is Steph Curry, because everybody thinks of Steph Curry as a 3-point shooter. And like, okay, so I want the ball and I'm going to do some stuff and I'm going to go up with it. And Steph does a lot of that. But what he does that nobody else has even tried to copy for some reason is he gets off ball and he runs like crazy around the court. And the reason you don't do it is because it's exhausting. And because at a minimum, even Steph Curry, 60% of the time he's running around the court, nothing happens. He doesn't get open. Something else happens. And I think it's really exhausting for players, for a Luka to say, hey, Kyrie has it going. Can you set up the weak side so that they're out of rebound position or they're out of help position? Like, you got to screen and you got to box out and you got to do all that kind of stuff. And it's exhausting. And you might not touch the ball for 3 minutes, but it's still doing something on the court. Even, as you mentioned, with Steph Curry running around, coming off of screens just to set the table. Luka doesn't seem to really enjoy that because he's so dominant at the part of the game that he loves the most. But again, you can win a lot of regular season games and you can even go deep into the playoffs. But I honestly believe when teams win championships, it's often because they mastered the parts of the game they don't like. Because at some point, a team is going to force you to play the way you don't want to play.
You mentioned Joel Embiid. Let's talk about him in a second. But first, want to remind the listeners to subscribe to the Kevin O'Connor Show. All right, Adam, on Tuesday night, Joel Embiid is going to make his return this season. The Sixers are going to be without Tyrese Maxey, so we're not going to see the Sixers at full strength either. But Embiid is returning. What are you going to be watching for first in Embiid's return?
Well, first of all, just how healthy he is, to see what he looks like. It's, I think, probably underappreciated. We all saw the first week of the season. The Thunder were locked in. The Celtics were locked in. But most teams were a little clunky. It takes like a week to kind of get into the flow. You're now hopping into a league that's 10 games in, 3 weeks in. You're almost certainly going to be out of shape and just your rhythm is off. So how far behind is he? Can he walk right in and dominate? That's number one. But my big question for the 76ers, and it's my big question for Embiid, and it's a little bit what we just talked about with Luka, but I think it's more extreme for Embiid. We know Embiid can be as dominant as any player in the history of the game. Getting to the foul line, everybody flattening out, doing your thing and shooting the jumper. Maybe you get into the post, you back a guy down, you draw a foul, whatever. That box is checked. We've checked it. We checked it 6 years ago. You can do that. But as I said, when you get to the playoffs, teams now scheme for that. They overload. They force you to go somewhere else. And if you haven't spent the entire season working on what do we do when teams overload? What is my 2-man game with Maxey? What's my 2-man game with Paul George? What's my 3-man game with Maxey and Cody Martin? What is the thing that we do? So teams are overloading this. That sets up for that. That's the thing that I felt like Embiid and the 76ers have never focused on, and I don't know why. And then when you get to the playoffs, they just kind of look like they're stuck in the mud because they haven't built anything other than the Embiid dominant offense. And so for me, I'm not necessarily looking for that on night one, but it's the question I have for the 76ers. Now it's health because they're starting behind the 8 ball. But aside from that, it's, are you going to build something that pays off in the end? Or are you going to collect a lot of wins doing one thing that we know every year, if a team shuts that faucet off, there's nothing else for you to go to? That's the big question.
No, it's interesting with Embiid because Maxey is somebody equipped to play in that 2-man game style offense you're talking about with intense chemistry. Like if you plug Maxey in Jamal Murray's place in the Nuggets, it would work seamlessly. Maxey's a great cutter. He moves quick. He's a willing passer. He can shoot off of movement. He can score at the rim. High IQ player. He can pass a little bit. Granted, he's not a primary playmaker. But with Embiid, you're saying that there's limitations there given Embiid's style that doesn't allow Maxey to flourish at the level that you perhaps see in a different situation. Is that what you're saying with that with the limitations with Embiid?
Not even necessarily, because I don't think Embiid has those limitations. I think he actually has more to his game, but he loves playing the note that is so comfortable for him. So when you get into an 82-game season and he plays 60 of those games are going to follow the same script. You're giving the ball to him. You're giving the ball to him. Everybody flatten out. You're a floor spacer. What I'm saying is you have to develop, like if I was Joel Embiid, this is easy for me to say because I'm not him, but if I was him, I would look at this year and I'd say, I want Tyrese Maxey to be player of the week 1 week while I'm healthy. That's going to be my goal. I want him to be player of the week because that means I'm going to spend all this time just working on 5 different things we do in pick and roll and triple handoffs that really get him going. So when we get to the playoffs and they're overloading on me, that's what I go to. Okay, I'm going to this because now the defense is compromised. I'm working on 3-man game options. Like, okay, we have Cody Martin or Kelly Oubre, not necessarily a big threat, or Caleb Martin, sorry, not necessarily a big threat. But what do I do with the 3 of them to create switches and to create different things that set the table? You work on those types of things over the course of the year, and now you have a whole arsenal of options. And no matter what the defense throws at you, collectively as a team, you have the information and confidence to go to the playbook, given the coverage that they're giving you. But it's very easy to win 5 games in a row in November, in October, when you just mash the Embiid button. Oh, he went for 45 against, that's awesome. You beat the Nets, he had 45. Did you learn anything that's going to serve you when you play the 76 or when you play the Celtics in April or May? And if the answer is no, what are we doing?
Maybe this will be the year we see it. Maybe it will be, because Embiid has trended up. Last year, first year under Nick Nurse, we did see a bit more DHOs from him, averaged a career high in assists last season. He was operating more as kind of that playmaking hub. Granted, it's not maybe to the levels that you might hope for, but maybe that's one step towards that. Maybe this year when he's not playing back-to-backs, when they need to save him a bit more, now that they have Paul George, get Maxey back in a few weeks from his hamstring issue, better supporting casts on paper at least. Maybe this is the year we see that from Embiid. If we do see that from Philly this year, if we do see these layers to Embiid's game, we're talking about a team right now that's only 2 of 7. They have not been good so far, but 2 of 7 in the East means you're only 3 back from the 3 seed in the Eastern Conference. If we do see some of these things from Joel Embiid, how would it change the way in which you envision Philly's upside come postseason time?
To me, they could win a championship. They're behind the 8 ball because of the start, and I'm a big believer in when you have to sprint through the finish line, it's really hard. Denver had a huge rest at the end of the year in 2023. Boston had a huge rest at the end of the year in 2024. They were rested and fresh in the playoffs. Can Philly win enough games to be in position? Even now, if they win at a 60-win pace, are you getting up to 52 wins because you're already so far back? So that part's tough. But yes, I am saying that they have the talent. Paul George is a phenomenal player. He has his flaws, but he's a phenomenal player that puts you in a real pickle. We know Embiid puts everybody in a pickle. Nobody can guard him. And then Tyrese Maxey, same thing. When he's at his best, he puts you in a pickle. You have 3 real weapons that if you're molding those weapons together, so they're not 3 individual things, but they're collectively make up all these different actions, they should be impossible to guard. And right now, the Celtics are impossible to guard. The Thunder, when they were healthy, are impossible to guard. Denver's kind of impossible to guard. It's early, but they'll probably end up there. Philly in the playoffs, they might not be as impossible to guard, even though they should be. They just have to work towards having that many layers to their offense. But I agree with you. Nick Nurse did make a progress in that direction. I just think it was 1 step when last year I kind of expected them to take 5 steps forward, but maybe it was building a foundation that will really pay off this year.
You also forgot their 4th star, Yahoo! Gershon Yabusele, the dancing bear. He's been really good. He has been. I mean, good for him. Following up on his success with the French national team, Yabusele has been really good for Philly. He's probably been he has been their best role player because a lot of their guys have been very inconsistent, but Yabu bringing size on defense, shooting over 40% from 3. Good for him. Hasn't been in the NBA since the 2018-19 season when he was with the Celtics. Pretty good to see him out there playing at a really high level. But you mentioned OKC in passing there, Adam, as another team with injuries. We've seen a lot of injuries since Friday, the last episode of this podcast. Zion Williamson out 4 to 6 weeks with a hamstring injury. Ja Morant out week to week with a hip injury. Kevin Durant, left calf strain, will be out at least 2 weeks. And then Chet Holmgren suffered a hip injury, a right iliac wing fracture. We're going to get an update in 8 to 10 weeks, according to the Thunder. 8 weeks is January 6th. 10 weeks is January 20th. So that's around the range we might hear some news on Chet's eventual return. But we saw tonight or Monday night against the Clippers how they're going to play without him, and they went small. The tallest guy
Really
OKC
small.
played on Monday, Ousmane Dieng, who's 6'9", but weighs only 185. The heaviest guy they played with was Dylan Jones, a rookie who weighs 235, but he's only 6'5" tall. So
Wow.
the Thunder beat the Clippers. It was a pretty competitive game down the stretch after the Clippers made a comeback in the second half, but I don't imagine this is very sustainable for them. They need Isaiah Hartenstein back pretty soon.
I think so too. And even with Hartenstein, like I love Hartenstein. I've been the like number one Hartenstein fan in the world. He does have his limitations. To me, he was perfect on that roster. He's perfect on the Knicks the year before that, where he could play a really important role and use up all of his fouls and what have you. And when Chet's there, I think that's exactly it. You throw him out there in a playoff series and he fouls out in 22 minutes, but you won those minutes. But now if you're going to count on him with really nobody behind him, nobody to play behind him, I look at that and I go, I think it's going to be a little feast or famine even when he gets back because of the foul trouble and because of some of his other limitations. I still think they'll be very good. They're extremely well coached. I think Dagnot's going to get a lot out of Hartenstein, honestly. I think we're going to see the best version of Hartenstein this year. But nonetheless, I thought they were a shoo-in. Write it in pen, not even pencil, write it in pen. They were going to be the 1 seed in the West. And I look at that injury and I go, okay, you said January, mid to late January. You're talking about a young, skinny 7-foot player, and it's a hip injury. You don't want him walking different. Small, tiny changes to your gait because you lost a little muscle, you're trying to build it up. Yeah, but he can work through that as you get out there. Don't do it. Don't do it. Because tiny micro adjustments to how you run, walk, jump, land when you're playing NBA caliber basketball at the weight that he is and the height that he is, to me, is such a risk. So I look at that and I go, I kind of would be surprised if he was back mid-January. I almost think this probably gets pushed back even further. And if you do that, I think they're no longer likely to be the 1 seed. I think they're in the mix for it, but certainly not going to be a slam dunk like we thought.
Yeah, I don't imagine he'll be back in January. It sounds like it'll be a game plan will be detailed in January. And we know OKC's history. The year he tore his ACL, he probably could have returned in March or April, his rookie season. But they held him out the whole year to be extra safe. And then he played 82 games last year, and it turned out to be the right decision. Yeah. And this year he gets hurt. And I would imagine OKC's looking at the situation come January. You have a 22-year-old rising star, and you can't compromise your future with a decision to rush him back for all the reasons you perfectly outlined. It's scary. A guy with his frame and his injury history to rush somebody back like that. Now, we have some mutual friends who argued last year that the Oklahoma City Thunder should have made a trade last deadline to take advantage of the team that they had. And I have long argued against that. I said, wait, don't rush it. See what you have in the postseason, then go into the summer and make the proper changes. And I think that was a fine decision. They go out and get Caruso. They get Isaiah Hartenstein, and they have a better overall roster now. They look like the 1 seed. But the Chet injury does raise those questions of, last year when they did stay healthy, maybe they should have taken advantage. But even this year, Adam, with Chet out for some amount of time, we'll see if he returns come January when they announce the plan for him. I do feel like the urgency for OKC to make a deal does rise significantly this year, because if he can return, if there's any chance he can return come April, or even if it's during the playoffs, you got to take advantage of this team. This team is too awesome and too deep and has too much talent to not take advantage. And what else are you going to do with all these picks, right? Like, don't they feel like a team that's going to have to make a move?
There's no question to me. Now, I don't know if it's the Chet move or what have you, but teams always feel like their window is open longer than it actually is. And it's not because those guys are all young. In theory, they're all going to be good players for a long time. But injuries happen at the worst time. There's never a right time for an injury, and you never know what's going to happen. And with Chet, he's played 2 seasons now, missed 1 entirely. And now we're in year 3, and he's going to miss a majority of this one. I think if you're the Thunder, you have to look at that and say, he's a perfect fit for what we're trying to do. like his basketball skill. He's a perfect cultural fit, and I think that's important. That team has this college basketball team vibe, right? They've all
you
grown
don't
up
agree with
together.
Draymond? You don't agree with Draymond that it's childish and they shouldn't be doing all that post game?
No, 100% it is. But Draymond is just, he's almost my age, so he's looking at these guys the way I do, which is like, these kids are a little annoying. But that's the job of the youth, right? They're supposed to like break their way into the echelon. But I'm with Draymond, actually. They are annoying, but but culturally, there's like not. I think it's a little underrated sometimes that 18-year-olds in the NBA play with 37-year-olds. That's a huge difference. Culturally, that's just such a big difference. That team has a nice young vibe to it. They've all grown up together. And if you start taking out a Chet and plugging in a 30-year-old, a 31 in his prime type player, it's not guaranteed it's going to work out. But nonetheless, I don't think the Thunder should look at this and say, we have 10 years to compete. What are we in a hurry for? You never know what things are around the corner.
There was some stuff bubbling up on social media that the Thunder should trade for Giannis, or at least try to trade for Giannis, or that the Bucks should try to trade Giannis to the Thunder. I'm not totally sold on that being the best decision for OKC. I've thought about this back and forth. Like, if the situation were to come up, it's hard to say no to trade for Giannis. But assuming you'd have to give up, a Jalen Williams and a bunch of picks and an Isaiah Hartenstein salary, there might be some diminishing returns with Giannis on OKC. And stylistically, you think about the way OKC plays. Is Giannis really the guy that you want to go all in for with the picks that you have if you're OKC, or are you looking elsewhere here? Would you trade for Giannis? The opportunity is there. You're on the phone with the Bucks. They want 8 first-round draft picks, Jalen Williams, Isaiah Hartenstein. Are you doing that?
I don't know if I love Chet and like Giannis. I don't know if that'd be the way I would pair this. So if that was the deal, I'm not so certain. What I will say is that what really stands out when you play the Oklahoma City Thunder is how many athletes they have. They have a lot. They have length, but they have speed. They have strength. And if you somehow added Giannis to the mix of that, I think it might be overwhelming. I already thought they might be overwhelming athletically with Lou Dort and Cason Wallace and all the different people they can put on ball. Shea obviously requires an athlete to guard him, so you have to have a guy occupied there. And then Chet Holmgren is an athlete and all over. If you added Giannis to even if you lost to Jalen Williams and you added Giannis to the mix, I'd be like, what team athletically just matches up? Somebody on the court is going to be at a massive athletic disadvantage at some position that they can punish you for. So I probably would take it. And then the worst thing is you get Giannis and it doesn't work out. Guess who's going to fetch you another great player? Giannis. Like, if you put him back on the market, teams would be like, oh, he's available again? Sure, he'll work in our system.
It's true. I mean, you could easily flip him if necessary, but we'll see. We'll see with Oklahoma City. I think what we're going to see them do is bide their time, play this small ball edition until Hartenstein gets back. I mean, what they did against Harden tonight was really impressive. It like one possession, it's Caruso. The next possession is Jalen Williams, and then it's J-Dub, and then it's SGA, and then it's Dort.
Waves.
Yes, exactly. They have so many great athletic defensive guards, and then against Zubats, like I know Zubats scored a bit later in the game, but I don't think it looked like he had ever dealt with hands that quick, getting swarmed by smaller guys, double team guys in the passing lanes, causing a turnover first possession of the game. Really impressive game plan by Oklahoma City tonight. And that's one thing I'll say about them. Daigneault, one of the most adaptable, one of the best coaches in the NBA. And if there's anybody that you can trust to help improve this team or figure out this mix without Chet for a while, I think it's going to be Daigneault.
What's interesting about Daigneault, because I think he is among the best coaches in terms of what you just said, and I think it's an important part of basketball. What is my team good at? What are they weak at? And let's adjust. Am I principled? Sure. I have my principles and things I value. But the truth is, above all else, everything is a tool, and how can I use that tool best? That's great. But I think there's another part of sports, and basketball is such a great testing ground for this, of sometimes the right answer is just smashing yourself through a wall. Like, there's no way around this wall. There's no way over it. There's no way to calculate it. Is my team the type of team that just runs through the wall? And I think they are tough, but they are a team to me that seems to tinker a lot. And I wonder if come playoff time, the lesson is tie game, 5 minutes to go, find a way. There's no adjustment to be made. run yourself through a wall to make sure that this win happens. And that's a part of basketball too. And when people say they're young, we haven't seen it yet, to me, that's what I mean when I say that. I want to see them win a game they're not supposed to, not because of talent or execution or scheme or any of that, but just because they willed their way through it and they have they've developed the scar tissue of doing that over and over again.
The Cavs remained undefeated. We're going to talk about that right after the break. All right, Adam, the Cavaliers moved to 12-0 on the season after beating the Bulls on Monday night. Darius Garland took over late in the game. Coming up, they got the Sixers on Wednesday, the Bulls again on Friday, the Hornets on Sunday, and then next Tuesday, they face the Boston Celtics in Boston. Are they going to be 15-0 heading into that Boston matchup 1 week from today?
Man, some of those, were any of those back-to-backs that you just rattled off?
Nope, every other day. Wednesday, Sixers, Friday, Bulls, Hornets, Sunday, and then Tuesday, Boston. So every other day.
Hornets looks like a trap game because I actually think the Hornets are a tough team to play against, and that's the one right before the marquee game. So that
fun, man.
They're so really fun, man. I think they're the most fun team actually for me.
Yeah, they really are. Kind of by the way, I mean, talk about Charles Lee coming from Boston, installing a brand new system in that Hornets offense. They've been tremendous to watch, fun every night. Got one of the best announcers in basketball calling their games. I love watching Charlotte. But yes, that could be the trap game. I agree.
That's the one that I look at, but I'll go ahead and say no. They'll go into that game undefeated, and that would set up a real... I mean, they've had some tests, right? It's not like they've had a bunch of cupcakes. They've won some big games. They beat the Knicks in a dogfight. They beat the Warriors. They smacked the Warriors. Like, they have some good wins under the belt, but that one to me would be the ultimate test for them, and I hope they arrive in Boston undefeated.
I hope so too. I mean, I think first of all, Tuesday is going to be the day where the NBA Cup is playing their group play game. So the game does have a slightly elevated importance depending on how you feel about the NBA Cup. At a minimum, the court will be different. Right. But it's also Boston, Cleveland. And if that game can take on even greater importance with an undefeated team going into Boston, having some of these games during the long regular season, especially this time of year in the middle of November, and make them feel like they matter even more. That's what we need as NBA fans, right?
Yes. Here's my thing, because I'm not an NBA Cup guy, and I enjoyed it last year. I enjoyed it. The teams took it seriously last year, and I'm very curious if they take it seriously this year, because my impression...
Starts tonight. We'll see.
Is that right?
Tuesday
so there
night,
you go.
Yeah.
But I'm curious because the NBA Cup felt big in November and December last year. And by January, I'd almost forgotten who was in it. Like I forgot who won that again or what have you. And I feel like a lot of the teams probably felt that way. So I'm curious. I thought the entire league took it seriously last year, and I kind of expect them to take it meaningfully less serious this year. But I hope I'm wrong, because I'm with you. It does make for good basketball unexpectedly.
It does. I mean, we'll see. We'll see. I hope teams take it seriously. I enjoyed the games. I was in Vegas last year. It was a very cool atmosphere, very different than a normal NBA game. Normal NBA games. Speaking of that, you posted something on X on Monday, and you said, I blame this Timberwolves loss on whoever decided to blast this song for the entirety of an extremely important possession in the clutch. And that's because...
This is so dumb. This is the dumbest thing yet this year.
It was just so dumb. The Heat missed 2 free throws, and the Timberwolves arena played the chicken dance song. And the entire time, Minnesota had the ball on offense with 2 minutes left in the game when they're up by what? 2-3 points?
3 points. And they were reeling. They were up 8. They just blew it. So they're blowing a lead. It's like you need a good possession.
So stupid. I am very anti-music during live action. And I posted that today, and I had some people respond to me saying, oh, that's an old man take. No. I felt this way when I was a teenager going to games. I felt this way my whole life watching games. Too much music. The college basketball atmosphere, anybody who's been to a college game where you get the live band, but not much music during live action, it just feels like it's more about the game.
Yeah. And I love the idea of like, oh, okay, boomer. It's like, hey, so the wrong side of this is the anti-chicken dance during the clutch time possessions of the game. Like the young hip thing to do is chicken dance. Like, are we doing the wave? Last minute of the game, everybody's doing the wave. It's ridiculous. It is weird, though. I will say this. America, with teams all over the nation, culturally is so different. And what you have in New York is you can have the Oregon, and you have great crowds. There's 10 million people in the city. You're going to have a great crowd, great natural atmosphere. When you get to places like Denver and Minneapolis and what have you, Tuesday night, it's a lot of family nights. It's a lot of family packs and different things, and it's almost a different clientele. So you do the chicken dance, and the little kids love it. But when you're watching the game, I just always think, all right, I'm an athlete. I've trained my whole life to make it in the NBA. I got the ball, pressure situation, and all of a sudden the chicken dance comes on, and you're like, where am I?
I mean, we might see some of that on Tuesday's Bucks-Raptors game between the worst two teams in the Eastern Conference. That's where it's a little bit more appropriate when you're talking about two losing teams. But
the whole game.
Yes, the entire game.
Just the chicken song.
And it might make sense, especially because Giannis is going to be without Damian Lillard, who on Monday night, Chris Haynes reported Damian Lillard was put in concussion protocol. So he'll be out Tuesday in the first NBA Cup group play game against the Raptors. The Bucks are 2-8, 14th in the Eastern Conference. The Raptors are 2-9, 15th in the Eastern Conference. It's not looking like the Bucks are going to be competing for the NBA Cup this year, will they, Adam?
I mean, who knows? It's the NBA Cup. Maybe Giannis gets going. I will say that team, when I watch them, has so much awkwardness to their chemistry between Dame and Giannis. And I would actually not be surprised. Not that I think the Bucks are good, not that I think Dame's the problem, but I would not be surprised if removing him from the equation gave them a short-term burst of life and clarity of like, okay, it's simple now. We're playing through Giannis and we're doing these types of things. So, it's Toronto. I'm not making any bold proclamations because I'm really low on the Bucks, but I wouldn't be surprised if they had a little run in Dame's absence for a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. Dame's been pretty damn good, though. I mean, they have a -6 net rating in the minutes that Giannis has been on the floor without Damian Lillard this season. I'm not feeling any optimism about the Bucks. I'm not sure if they'll go.
They're not a good team.
No, I'm not. I don't know if they'll go full on blow it up mode. But there is no chance this team beats Boston. No chance that they beat Boston. And I thought, the moment over the weekend where Giannis did a fake handshake with Jaylen Brown after decking him with an elbow. And then after the game, Jaylen Brown called Giannis a child. I think Giannis is having too much fun for the best player on a team that stinks, for a team that's crumbling. They're crumbling right now. You can't be doing that when your team stinks this much.
I'm worried about Milwaukee, man. That ride might be over.
Speaking about Boston, let's take a question from the mailbag to close the show. One question this week. This is from Jim on Instagram. Let me give some context first. Jayson Tatum is logging 5.8 isolations per game this season. That's the most in the NBA. And he's averaging a very, very efficient 1.1 points per shot on those isolations. That's a career high for him. What's been fueling this overall change in his play is he's getting to the basket more, taking a career high in free throws. He's taking even more threes this season, and working with his trainer, it seems that he's fixed the broken three-point shot that we saw in the playoffs and throughout the Olympics. So the mailbag question from Jim, he asked, does Jayson Tatum's development raise Boston's ceiling even higher? What do you think, Adam?
I'm going to say no, and this is going to sound controversial. I mean, the really answer is okay. Anytime a player gets better, the answer is yes. But I really think that the reason the Boston Celtics won last year, this doesn't sound like, it's not a hot take. They had a phenomenal team. They were no longer one person's team. Tatum is the best player, but they have a system that works with 5 guys, and at any given moment, it could be the action between these two or that two or what have you. It's just spaced, and it was very flat. And I think one thing that
isn't it still?
It still is. But my point is the one thing that can derail that, and by the way, this is my concern with the Cavs as well. I'm not just saying this about Boston. But Boston should be favorite. I don't want people to think I'm low on Boston. They should be the favorite to win this. They're a phenomenal team. They have no weaknesses. They do everything well. But so you almost look at that and go, okay, so what can disrupt that? You're almost more vulnerable from within than without. And sometimes a super trait, Boston doesn't need help on offense. They don't actually struggle ever offensively. So shifting it a little bit more to an isolation or a player feeling like, hey, I'm better at this year, therefore I should do this more. That's where that can get tricky. Jayson Tatum last year did not do that. I was so impressed by it that in the Eastern Conference Finals, he didn't press the envelope when there was momentum for Jaylen Brown winning the award, what have you. Didn't matter. Just win the game. Just play it. You get into the finals. Same thing. He could have, okay, well, this is my chance to shine a little. We have a lead. I can do it. He never did it. He played team ball. But when you tell me he worked on those things, that's the one thing that can derail it is you get into a clutch situation and you try to ISO too much. I think Donovan Mitchell, who I love and I think is an incredible player, or I should say I think is an incredible player, he's a guy to me that abandons what works when the pressure rises more often than not. He's like, well, I got to take over now. It's my time to do it. If Tatum was that in the past, he's not that now. That's the only thing that can derail it for me for the Celtics.
How much of this comes from being a guy who watches Jokic
a lot
the last decade?
Yeah. But I mean, even if you go back and look, like the Celtics won a very balanced style of play. The Nuggets won a balanced style of play. The Warriors won a really balanced style of play. They rely on Steph Curry a lot, but it's still kind of the same thing. They have a system and they don't break from it for anybody. So I look at it and I go, it's kind of a trend in today's NBA that when you're too heliocentric and rely on one player, there's just a ceiling to it.
I think that's fair, though. I think in the context of Boston, they are still what they were last season. And
no question.
For them, Tatum can scale back if necessary, but there is value in him. I mean, look, Tatum at one point in his career was a very inefficient ISO scorer, especially late in games. And that's one of the reasons why I didn't believe in Boston last year. I was wrong about the Celtics last year. But this year, it does seem like he has taken that up a notch. He's progressively gotten better in endgame ISO scoring situations. And this year, it's completely blossoming. Small sample, early year, blah, blah, blah. Obviously, that goes without saying.
They're unbelievable.
It's at least, yeah, they are. They're unbelievable. They're still the favorites. But I think to your point, they are such favorites, the thing that can take them down is something from within. That's exactly your underlying point, yes.
That's my underlying point. If I told you Jamal Murray really worked on his isolations this year, you'd be like, cool, you don't need that. You've got Yoke. But I guess the once a game where you do need it, it's nice that you worked on that thing. Just don't do it too much.
Adam, where can we find your stuff?
The All-NBA Show with me and Tim Legler on YouTube. Look for All City All-NBA. And then if you want Nuggets coverage, DNVR Nuggets is the place.
Adam, you crush it. You're amazing. Appreciate you joining me today.
You're the best,
man.
KOC.
Thank you so much to Adam Mares for joining me on today's episode of The Kevin O'Connor Show. Thank you to Stone for producing it. And thank you for giving it a listen. Please give us a 5-star rating on Spotify and Apple and a thumbs up on YouTube. It really does help out the show. And please subscribe if you haven't done so already. Hope you enjoy the rest of your week. We'll be back again on Friday.